Chapter 21 of Emily Climbs by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nancy Halper, Summit, New Jersey. Chapter 21. Thicker Than Water. Emily did not sleep until nearly morning. The storm had ceased, and the landscape around the old John house had a spectral look in the light of the sinking moon when she finally drifted into slumber, with a delightful sense of accomplishment, for she had finished thinking out her story. Nothing remained now except to jot its outlines down in her Jimmy book. She would not feel safe until she had them in black and white. She would not try to write it yet. Oh, not for years. She must wait until time and experience had made of her pen an instrument capable of doing justice to her conception. For it is one thing to pursue an idea through an ecstatic night, and quite another to get it down on paper in a manner that will reproduce a tenth of its original charm and significance. Emily was wakened by Ilse, who was sitting on the side of her bed looking rather pale and seedy, but with amber eyes full of unconquerable laughter. "Well, I've slept off my debauch, Emily Starr, and my tummy's all right this morning. Malcolm's whiskey did settle it, though I think the remedy is worse than the disease. I suppose you wondered why I wouldn't talk last night." "I thought you were too drunk to talk," said Emily candidly. Ilse giggled. "I was too drunk not to talk. When I got to that sofa, Emily, my giddiness passed off and I wanted to talk. Oh, golly, but I wanted to talk. And I wanted to say the silliest things and tell everything I ever knew or thought. I'd just enough sense left to know I mustn't say those things, or I'd make a fool of myself forever. And I felt that if I said one word, it would be like taking a cork out of a bottle. Everything would gurgle out. So I just buttoned my mouth up and wouldn't say the one word. It gives me a chill to think of the things I could have said, and before Perry. You'll never catch your little Ilse going on a spree again. I'm a reformed character from this day forth." "What I can't understand," said Emily, "is how such a small dose of anything could have turned your head like that." "Oh, well, you know, Mother was a Mitchell. It's a notorious fact that the Mitchells can't take a teaspoonful of booze without toppling. It's one of their family kinks. Well, rise up, my love, my fair one. The boys are getting a fire on, and Perry says we can dope up a fair meal from the pork and beans and crackers. I'm hungry enough to eat the cans." It was while Emily was rummaging in the pantry in search of some salt that she made a great discovery. Far back on the top shelf was a pile of dusty old books, dating back probably to the days of John and Elmira Shaw. Old mildewed diaries, almanacs, account books. Emily knocked the pile down, and when she was picking it up, discovered that one of the books was an old scrapbook. A loose leaf had fallen out of it. As Emily replaced it, her eyes fell on the title of a poem pasted on it. She caught it up, her breath coming quickly. A Legend of Abegweit, the poem with which Evelyn had won the prize. Here it was, in this old, yellowed scrapbook of 20 years' vintage, word for word, except that Evelyn had cut out 2 verses to shorten it to the required length. "And the 2 best verses in it," thought Emily contemptuously. "How like Evelyn! She has simply no literary judgment." Emily replaced the books on the shelf, but she slipped the loose leaf into her pocket and ate her share of breakfast very absently. By this time men were on the roads breaking out the tracks. Perry and Teddy found a shovel in the barn and soon had a way open to the road. They got home finally, after a slow but uneventful drive, to find the New Moon folks rather anxious as to their fate, and mildly horrified to learn that they had had to spend the night in the old John house. "You might have caught your deaths of cold," said Elizabeth severely. "Well, it was Hobson's choice. It was that or freeze to death in the drifts," said Emily, and nothing more was said about the matter. Since they had got home safe, and nobody had caught cold, what more was there to say? That was the New Moon way of looking at it. The Shrewsbury way was somewhat different. But the Shrewsbury way did not become apparent immediately. The whole story was over Shrewsbury by Monday night, Ilse told it in school and described her drunken orgy with great spirit and vivacity, amid shrieks of laughter from her classmates. Emily, who had called for the first time on Evelyn Blake that evening, found Evelyn looking quite well pleased over something. "Can't you stop Ilse from telling that story, my dear?" "What story?" "Why, about getting drunk last Friday night, the night you and she spent with Teddy Kent and Perry Miller in that old house up at Derry Pond," said Evelyn smoothly. Emily suddenly flushed. There was something in Evelyn's tone. The innocent fact seemed all at once to take on shades of a sinister significance. Was Evelyn being deliberately insolent? "I don't know why she shouldn't tell the story," said Emily coldly. "It was a good joke on her." "But you know how people will talk," said Evelyn gently. "It's all rather unfortunate. Of course, you couldn't help being caught in the storm, I suppose. But Ilse will only make matters worse. She is so indiscreet. Haven't you any influence over her, Emily?" "I didn't come here to discuss that," said Emily bluntly. "I came to show you something I found in the old John house." She held out the leaf of the scrapbook. Evelyn looked at it blankly for a moment. Then her face turned a curious mottled purple. She made an involuntary movement as if to snatch the paper, but Emily quickly drew it back. Their eyes met. In that moment, Emily felt that the score between them was at last even. She waited for Evelyn to speak. After a moment, Evelyn did speak, sullenly. "Well, what are you going to do about it?" "I haven't decided yet," said Emily. Evelyn's long, brown, treacherous eyes swept up to Emily's face with a crafty, seeking expression. "I suppose you mean to take it to Dr. Hardy and disgrace me before the school?" "Well, you deserve it, don't you?" said Emily, judicially. I wanted to win that prize because Father promised me a trip to Vancouver next summer if I won it," muttered Evelyn, suddenly crumpling. I was crazy to go. Oh, don't betray me, Emily. Father will be furious. I'll give you the Parkman set. I'll do anything, only don't—" Evelyn began to cry. Emily didn't like the sight. "I don't want your Parkman," she said contemptuously. "But there is one thing you must do. You will confess to Aunt Ruth that it was you who drew that mustache on my face the day of the English exam, and not Ilse." Evelyn wiped away her tears and swallowed something. "That was only a joke," she sobbed. "It was no joke to lie about it," said Emily sternly. "You're so blunt." Evelyn looked for a dry spot on her handkerchief and found one. "It was all a joke. I just ran back from the shop to do it. I thought, of course, you'd look in the glass when you got up. I didn't suppose you'd go to class like that. And I didn't know your aunt took it so seriously. Of course, I'll tell her if you'll... "Write it out and sign it," said Emily remorselessly. Evelyn wrote it out and signed it. "You'll give me that," she pleaded, with an entreating gesture toward the scrapbook leaf. "Oh, no, I'll keep this," said Emily. "And what assurance have I that you won't tell some day, after all?" sniffed Evelyn. "You have the word of a star," said Emily loftily. She went out with a smile. She had finally conquered in the long duel, and she held in her hand what would finally clear Ilse in Aunt Ruth's eyes. Aunt Ruth sniffed a good deal over Evelyn's note, and was inclined to ask questions as to how it had been extorted. But not getting much satisfaction out of Emily on this score, and knowing that Alan Burnley had been sore at her ever since her banishment of his daughter, she secretly welcomed an excuse to recall it. "Very well, then. I told you Ilse could come here when you could prove to my satisfaction that she had not played that trick on you. You have proved it, and I keep my word. I am a just woman," concluded Aunt Ruth, who was, perhaps, the most unjust woman on the earth at that time. So far, well. But if Evelyn wanted revenge, she tasted it to the full in the next 3 weeks, without raising a finger or wagging a tongue to secure it. All Shrewsbury burned with gossip about the night of the storm. Insinuations, distortions, wholesale fabrications. Emily was so snubbed at Janet Thompson's afternoon tea that she went home white with humiliation. Ilse was furious. "I wouldn't mind if I had been rip-roaring drunk and had the fun of it," she vowed with a stamp of her foot. "But I wasn't drunk enough to be happy, only just drunk enough to be silly. There are moments, Emily, when I feel that I could have a gorgeous time if I were a cat, and these old Shrewsbury dames were mice. But let's keep our smiles pinned on. I really don't care a snap for them. This will soon die out. We'll fight." "You can't fight insinuations," said Emily bitterly. Ilse did not care, but Emily cared horribly. The Murray pride smarted unbearably. And it smarted worse and worse as time went on. A sneer at the night of the storm was published in a rag of a paper that was printed in a town on the mainland, and made up of spicy notes sent to it from all over the Maritimes. Nobody ever confessed to reading it, but almost everybody knew everything that was in it, except Aunt Ruth, who wouldn't have handled the sheet with the tongs. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who was referred to, and the venomous innuendo of the thing was unmistakable. Emily thought she would die of shame, and the worst sting was that it was so vulgar and ugly, and had made that beautiful night of laughter and revelation and rapturous creation in the old John house vulgar and ugly. She had thought it would always be one of her most beautiful memories. And now this. Teddy and Perry saw red and wanted to kill somebody, but whom could they kill? As Emily told them, anything they said or did would only make the matter worse. It was bad enough after the publication of that paragraph. Emily was not invited to Florence Black's dance the next week, the great social event of the winter. She was left out of Hattie Denoon's skating party. Several of the Shrewsbury matrons did not see her when they met her on the streets. Others set her 1,000 miles away by bland, icy politeness. Some young men about town grew oddly familiar in look and manner. One of them, with whom she was totally unacquainted, spoke to her one evening in the post office. Emily turned and looked at him. Crushed, humiliated as she was still Archibald Murray's granddaughter. The wretched youth was 3 blocks away from the post office before he came to himself and knew where he was. To this day, he has not forgotten how Emily Birdstar's eyes looked when she was angry. But even the Murray look, while it might demolish a concrete offender, could not scorch scandalous stories. Everybody, she felt morbidly, believed them. It was reported to her that Miss Percy of the library said she had always distrusted Emily Starr's smile. She had always felt sure it was deliberately provocative and alluring. Emily felt that she, like poor King Henry, would never smile again. People remembered that old Nancy Priest had been a wild thing 70 years ago. And hadn't there been some scandal about Mrs. Dutton herself in her girlhood? What's bred in the bone, you understand. Her mother had eloped, hadn't she? And Ilse's mother? Of course, she had been killed by falling into the old Lee well, but who knew what she would have done if she hadn't? Then there was that old story of bathing on Blairwater sandshore au naturel. In short, you didn't see ankles like Emily's on proper girls. They simply didn't have them. Even harmless, unnecessary Andrew had ceased to call on Friday nights. There was a sting in this. Emily thought Andrew a bore and dreaded his Friday nights. She had always meant to send him packing as soon as he gave her an opportunity. But for Andrew to go packing of his own accord had a very different flavor, mark you. Emily clenched her hands when she thought of it. A bitter report came to her ears that Principal Hardy had said she ought to resign from the presidency of the senior class. Emily threw up her head. Resign? Confess defeat and admit guilt? Not she. "I could knock that man's block off," said Ilse. "Emily Starr, don't let yourself worry over this. What does it matter what a lot of doddering old donkeys think? I hereby devote them to the infernal gods. They'll have their maws full of something else in a month, and they'll forget this." "I'll never forget it," said Emily passionately. "To my dying day I'll remember the humiliation of these weeks. And now, Ilse, Mrs. Tolliver has written asking me to give up my stall at the St. John's Bazaar." "Emily Starr, she hasn't." "She has. Oh, of course she cloaks it under an excuse that she'd like a stall for her cousin from New York who is visiting her. But I understand. And it's 'Dear Miss Starr,' look you, when it was 'Dearest Emily' a few weeks ago. Everybody in St. John's will know why I've been asked to step out. And she almost went on her knees to Aunt Ruth to let me take the stall. Aunt Ruth didn't want to let me." "What will your Aunt Ruth say about this?" "Oh, that's the worst of it, Ilse. She'll have to know now. She's never heard a word of this since she's been laid up with her sciatica. I've lived in dread of her finding out, for I know it will be hideous when she does. She's getting about now. Of course she'd soon hear it anyway. And I haven't the spirit to stand up to her, Ilse. Oh, it all seems like a nightmare." "They've got such mean, narrow, malicious, beastly little minds in this town," said Ilse, and was straightway comforted. But Emily could not ease her tortured spirit by a choice assortment of adjectives. Neither could she write out her misery and so rid herself of it. There were no more jottings in her Jimmy book, no further entries in her journal, no new stories or poems. The flash never came now, never would come again. There would never again be wonderful little secret raptures of insight and creation which no one could share. Life had grown thin and poor, tarnished and unlovely. There was no beauty in anything, not even in the golden-white March solitude of New Moon, when she went home for the weekend. She had longed to go home, where no one believed ill of her. No one at New Moon had heard anything of what was being whispered in Shrewsbury. But their very ignorance tortured Emily. Soon they would know. They would be hurt and grieved over the fact that a Murray, even an innocent Murray, had become a target for scandal. And who knew how they would regard Ilse's mishap with Malcolm Scotch? Emily felt it almost a relief to go back to Shrewsbury. She imagined slurs in everything Principal Hardy said, covert insults in every remark or look of her schoolmates. Only Evelyn Blake posed as friend and defender, and this was the most unkindest cut of all. Whether alarm or malice was behind Evelyn's pose, Emily did not know. But she did know that Evelyn's parade of friendship and loyalty and staunch belief in the face of overwhelming evidence was something that seemed to smirch her more than all the gossip could. Evelyn went about assuring everyone that she wouldn't believe one word against poor dear Emily. Poor dear Emily could have cheerfully watched her drown, or thought she could. Meanwhile, Aunt Ruth, who had been confined to her house for several weeks with sciatica, and had been so crusty with it that neither friends nor enemies had dared to hint anything to her of the gossip concerning her niece, was beginning to take notice. Her sciatica had departed and left her faculties free to concentrate on other things. She recalled that Emily's appetite had been poor for days, and Aunt Ruth suspected that she had not been sleeping. The moment this suspicion occurred to Aunt Ruth, she took action. Secret worries were not to be tolerated in her house. "Emily, I want to know what is the matter with you," she demanded, one Saturday afternoon when Emily, pale and listless, with purple smudges under her eyes, had eaten next to nothing for dinner. A little color came into Emily's face. The hour she had dreaded so was upon her. Aunt Ruth must be told all. And Emily felt miserably that she had neither the courage to endure the resultant heckling, nor the spirit to hold her own against Aunt Ruth's whys and wherefores. She knew so well how it would all be. Horror over the John House episode, as if anybody could have helped it. Annoyance over the gossip, as if Emily were responsible for it. several assurances that she had always expected something like this, and then intolerable weeks of reminders and slurs. Emily felt a sort of mental nausea at the whole prospect. For a minute she could not speak. "What have you been doing?" persisted Aunt Ruth. Emily set her teeth. It was unendurable, but it must be endured. The story had to be told. The only thing to do was to get it told as soon as possible. "I haven't done anything wrong, Aunt Ruth. I've just done something that has been misunderstood." Aunt Ruth sniffed, but she listened without interruption to Emily's story. Emily told it as briefly as possible, feeling as if she were a criminal in the witness box, with Aunt Ruth as judge, jury, and prosecuting attorney all in one. When she had finished, she sat in silence waiting for some characteristic Aunt Ruthian comment. "And what are they making all the fuss about?" said Aunt Ruth. Emily didn't know exactly what to say. She stared at Aunt Ruth. They're thinking and saying all sorts of horrible things," she faltered. "You see, down here in sheltered Shrewsbury, they didn't realize what a storm it was. And then, of course, everyone who repeated the story colored it a little. We were all drunk by the time it filtered through Shrewsbury." "What exasperates me," said Aunt Ruth, "is to think you told about it in Shrewsbury at all. Why on earth didn't you keep it all quiet?" "That would have been sly." Emily's demon suddenly prompted her to say this. Now that the story was out, she felt a rebound of spirit that was almost laughter. "Sly! It would have been common sense," snorted Aunt Ruth. But of course Ilse couldn't hold her tongue. "I've often told you, Emily, that a fool friend is 10 times more dangerous than an enemy." "But what are you killing yourself worrying for? Your conscience is clear. This gossip will soon die out." "Principal Hardy says I ought to resign from the presidency of the class," said Emily. "Jim Hardy! Why, his father was a hired boy to my grandfather for years," said Aunt Ruth in tones of ineffable contempt. "Does Jim Hardy imagine that my niece would behave improperly?" Emily felt herself all at sea. She thought she really must be dreaming. Was this incredible woman Aunt Ruth? It couldn't be Aunt Ruth. Emily was up against one of the contradictions of human nature. She was learning that you may fight with your kin, disapprove of them, even hate them, but that there is a bond between you for all that. Somehow, your very nerves and sinews are twisted with theirs. Blood is always thicker than water. Let an outsider attack, that's all. Aunt Ruth had at least one of the Murray virtues: loyalty to clan. "Don't worry over Jim Hardy," said Aunt Ruth. "I'll soon settle him. I'll teach people to keep their tongues off the Murrays." "But Mrs. Tolliver has asked me to let her cousin take my stall in the bazaar," said Emily. "You know what that means." "I know that Polly Tolliver is an upstart and a fool," retorted Aunt Ruth. "Ever since Nat Tolliver married his stenographer, St. John's Church hasn't been the same place. 10 years ago she was a barefooted girl running round the back streets of Charlottetown. The cats themselves wouldn't have brought her in. Now she puts on the airs of a queen and tries to run the church. I'll soon clip her claws. She was pretty thankful a few weeks ago to have a Murray in her stall. It was a rise in the world for her. Polly Tolliver, forsooth! What is this world coming to?" Aunt Ruth sailed upstairs, leaving a dazed Emily looking at vanishing bogies. Aunt Ruth came down again, ready for the warpath. She had taken out her crimps, put on her best bonnet, her best black silk, and her new sealskin coat. Thus arrayed, she skimmed uptown to the Tolliver residence on the hill. She remained there half an hour closeted with Mrs. Nat Tolliver. Aunt Ruth was a short, fat little woman, looking very dowdy and old-fashioned in spite of new bonnet and sealskin coat. Mrs. Nat was the last word in fashion and elegance, with her Paris gown, her lorgnette, and her beautifully marcelled hair. Marcells were just coming in then, and Mrs. Nats was the first in Shrewsbury. But the victory of the encounter did not perch on Mrs. Tolliver's standard. Nobody knows just what was said at that notable interview. Certainly Mrs. Tolliver never told. But when Aunt Ruth left the big house, Mrs. Tolliver was crushing her Paris gown and her Marcel waves among the cushions of her davenport while she wept tears of rage and humiliation. And Aunt Ruth carried a note in her muff to Mrs. Tolliver's dear Emily, saying that her cousin was not going to take part in the bazaar, and would dear Emily be so kind as to take the stall as at first planned. Dr. Hardy was next interviewed, and again Aunt Ruth went, saw, conquered. The maid in the Hardy household heard and reported one sentence of the confab, though nobody ever believed that Aunt Ruth really said to stately, spectacled Dr. Hardy, "I know you're a fool, Jim Hardy, but for heaven's sake pretend you're not for 5 minutes." No, the thing was impossible. Of course the maid invented it. "You won't have much more trouble, Emily," said Aunt Ruth on her return home. "Polly and Jim have got their craws full. When people see you at the bazaar, they'll soon realize what way the wind blows and trim their sails accordingly. I've a few things to say to some other folks when opportunity offers. Matters have come to a pretty pass if decent boys and girls can't escape freezing to death without being slandered for it. Don't you give this thing another thought, Emily. Remember, you've got a family behind you." Emily went to her glass when Aunt Ruth had gone downstairs. She tilted it at the proper angle and smiled at Emily in the glass, smiled slowly, provocatively, alluringly. "I wonder where I put my Jimmy book," thought Emily. "I must add a few more touches to my sketch of Aunt Ruth." End of chapter 21. Recording by Nancy Halper, Summit, New Jersey.